Okay. Our key speaker, Mr. Paul Mitchell, is running for the 10th Congressional seat, Candace Miller's seat, because Candace is leaving here after her term. Paul has been a businessman, very successful. Mr. Howell has spoken. He's got a wonderful wife. Her name is Sherry. He has 6 children. His oldest son is a police officer. His youngest one is 5 years old, so that's quite a handful right there that you're dealing with right there. And he lives in Dryden. He was instrumental in the proposal to stop the gas tax, Proposal 1. 80% of us voted against that, partly because of what he did to help us. So without further ado, I'd like to present to all of you Paul Mitchell.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much for the opportunity to come talk with you and for the kind introduction. Thank you to Representative Howell as well. Those are kind words, and I appreciate it. The video they were showing earlier, I didn't know they were. I was told Bill, I didn't know that they were videotaping that. Where's that from? It brings back memories of last year. It was a colorful, interesting year. And it's a big part of what I want to talk about tonight. I've had 2 questions asked to me a lot. One is, why are you running? Why are you in this? And then the other is, tell us more about your background. Sometimes the third is, tell us about some of the issues you think are important. And I'll tell you a little bit about that and save time for questions, as that's the most valuable part of the whole conversation are the questions. And the most important part is you get to ask your questions on your terms. Why I'm running, Proposal 1 is a good example and was part of the core of why I decided to run. We were dealt a ballot proposal for a $2 billion annual tax increase, as that is the best that our legislators could do. Now, thankfully, I'm very thankful that we have Gary and a number of others that are going to stand up, because I felt that that was a pretty poor way to go about fixing our roads. And in fact, the majority of the money, or half of the money, didn't go to fix our roads. They didn't want to tell us about that. They didn't want to tell you about that. I spent the Christmas holidays that year looking at the bills, all 40,000 wonderful words. And I went to school in public policy and economics. I'm reading this going, this is the dumbest thing I've seen in my adult life, I believe. So I formed the committee, Say No to Higher Taxes. Now, it won't surprise you to know that I didn't get a big attaboy from the governor's office. I could tell you all the detail behind that, but they weren't warm fuzzies, okay? I didn't get a lot of warm fuzzies from some interest groups in Lansing. That wasn't the point. The point was, in my opinion, it was a dumb thing to do. Yeah, our roads need to be fixed, Lord knows, and they still do, by the way. But we owe the taxpayers. They owed all of us better than that. What I expressed multiple times, that the responsibility of any legislator, either the state legislature or Congress, is to use the money that we give them efficiently and effectively to do the things that we want them to do, to set priorities on what the voters are telling them, and in fact set priorities. Far too often, they don't set priorities. They expect us to reprioritize our budgets to pay our taxes. This is not the way it should work. So we opposed it. They spent $10 million trying to pass that nightmare. With help of groups like yours and groups all over the state, I spent 5 months doing town halls all over the state, including that little gem. That video isn't the best. I apparently had to work on my being more photogenic. But it's an example of what I spent 5 months doing. Our committee spent about $230,000. Yeah, about $200,000, that was mine. And yes, my wife did question my sanity on several occasions. But I can't tell you whether I'm happier that we won at almost 81% voting no, or that we get 25% of the eligible voters out to vote in a special election. That's quite an achievement. That was a historic number. We were able to get people involved that historically hadn't been all that involved. We were able to draw across the political spectrum to say, no, we expect better of our legislature. What that did for me was cause me to think, wait a minute, if I want to be involved in policy, if I want to impact those things, if I feel that strongly about it, I need to stay involved. And for better or for worse, that means I need to do politics. Not exactly my strong suit. I am not necessarily the most politically astute guy when it comes to being politically correct on some things. You'll see that from some of my answers to questions, I'm sure. But I decided to be involved with politics. When Sherry asked me, well, why are you going to continue to do this? The other thing I said was I pointed to Declan, our almost 6 years old. He'll be 6 in April 26th. I said, if I don't, who's going to take care of them? I've had opportunities in my life that aren't available for our children or our grandchildren right now. Let's be honest about it. I grew up in a working class family. I had 6 brothers and sisters. My dad built trucks for the line at General Motors until he was unfortunately one of those ones that got the early retirement, the special deal for you. He was an hourly worker, and his plant closed, Pontiac Truck and Bus, and he went home. My mom worked at the Salvation Army. The only way I went to college was I worked in high school, starting and delivering papers and all kinds of fun things like that. By the way, the only dog that ever bit me was a little dog, not a big dog. Little dogs. I worked my way through college. I worked full-time almost, about 30 hours a week while I went to college in order to pay for my way through Michigan State. I bleed green. I'm a Spartan. Yes, I did mourn when they lost in the playoffs, in the sweets, and the basketball playoffs and March Madness. That was painful. But I went to school in public policy and economics. I attended a school called James Madison College. We studied the Constitution, the Federalist Papers. We studied them because that is the core of our society. That's how this country was founded. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But it's an important part of what I gathered from Michigan State. I went to work and spent 30 years in over 30 years in workforce development. I began when I was in college, working initially for the state, and spent over 30 years in the private sector helping people get the skills they need to go to work in the workforce, helping adults prepare for jobs. My company ran some of the largest welfare to work programs in the country back when welfare to work meant going to work, not sitting on the sofa and collecting benefits. We were the lead contractor in the city of Detroit. Yes, I could tell you stories about Detroit. Philadelphia, it's not the city of brotherly love, don't believe it. Savannah, Georgia, Cleveland, Mobile, Alabama, Grand Rapids. We ran some of the largest and most effective programs in the country, and we competed with the public sector agencies and nonprofits to run those. They didn't invite us to Philadelphia because we were either politically connected or anything like that. We had to compete. I took over the company, which you know is Ross Medical, and became the CEO. I was the CEO for 6.5 years. I worked there for 27 years. When I retired, we trained 6,000 adults a year for allied health jobs all throughout the middle of the United States, most of them in Michigan. Our corporate headquarters is in St. Clair. I moved them there and became CEO. Before that, our division headquarters was in St. Clair. I lived in St. Clair for 9 years. Now, I think you said that. I live in Dryden. And for me, the decision was, as I looked at the economy, we needed someone to run for office who understood how the economy actually worked, that dealt with regulations. When I retired, we had 6 states. All of them had different federal regulations. We had federal regulations. We had legislatures in 6 states, all of which could do something crazy in a given time. So trust me, I understand how the economy works. More importantly, I actually created jobs. I signed the front of paychecks. I made payables. I had to meet a budget. A unique idea for Congress, by the way, and a president. Oh, by the way, I didn't get to just write my own budget. No one else cared. I had a board of directors. They had very direct interest in it. I retired in 2011 when majority interest in my company was sold to a group in New York. After 27.5 years, you had to know when to go home, sort of like Steve Eisenman decided to go home, or Peyton Manning, you've had enough. No, I didn't need surgery, but there were days it was a pretty tough existence. It was busy. But I loved doing what I did because I got to help people develop skills and go to work while I also supported my family. And what better deal? I was raised in a household. I still remember my mother saying, you talk about things you want to do, and she'd look at you and say, well, get off the couch and do something. And that's a corollary of what I think this country needs. I say that because look what's going on in the presidential election. Look what's going on in a variety of other, look, Proposal 1. What the country's saying, what the voters are saying is they want people that will lead. They want action. They don't want hearings, resolutions, all the things that go on some days. Means nothing gets done in Congress, and some days nothing gets done in our state legislature. I had a chance to talk to Gary earlier today. I was thrilled with the initial bills he put in. The idea that the state legislature and the governor's office has gone 40 years and not been subject to Freedom of Information Act, that's an astonishing thing. Because nothing's wrong with transparency. I've been asked, should Congress not have the same laws imposed on them that they impose on the public? You bet your life they should. Why should they not? There are too many people there that don't understand what happens with these laws and ultimately the regulations because they've never worked in the real world. They have spent the majority of their lives being career politicians. And to be blunt with you, what is it a career politician worries about most? Help me out here, folks. What do they worry about first? Re-election. What's the second thing they worry about? Not quite. They have to raise the money to be reelected. What's the third thing they worry about? Especially in Michigan. What the next job they're going to run for in their term limit is. Now, you'll note that the best thing you're going to get is maybe it's fourth. Our concerns, the things we worry about. When I talked about running for office, a number of people said to me, you realize you have to spend 80% of your time raising money? This came from people in the political system. Now, how is it that people get to talk with folks like you if they spend 80% of their time on the telephone or doing high-end fundraisers? How does that work? From the beginning of July until the end of last month, I did almost 480 events, meet and greets, small group things around the district. I spent my time doing that since July, when shortly after I announced. I continue to do that. I can't tell you how many a week I do, but if you want to talk about the schedule, let me know. I'm happy to go through it with you. Why? Because it's important I talk to the voters. We've raised some money, but that's not the first thing we do any day. And it's not the first thing we do when we have an event is we want you to have your check before we'll talk to you. Because that's not how I believe this country and this democracy works. A couple of quick things, and we'll go to questions. Kind of where I stand on some things, and some I've talked with this group about before. The First Amendment's pretty simple, and unfortunately, we keep losing it. They keep whittling away at it. Like Emory College, they were doing an investigation to see who wrote something supporting Trump in chalk because they felt threatened. Seriously. Or you've got a protest, I forgot where it is, I'm sorry, where they said they needed a safe zone because people were disagreeing with them. The reality is the First Amendment is intended to, we have to support the First Amendment even if we are offended by what the speaker is saying. Because in fact we don't have freedom of speech. And if we don't have freedom of speech, we don't have freedom of assembly. We can go through that whole list. The idea we need safe zones, you need to be safe from someone physically threatening you or verbally threatening you where you feel at risk. But the idea we have to create a safe zone, and heaven forbid, should you say you support Trump, because clearly I feel threatened. How the world has changed. We have to stop that. We have to stand up against that. Second Amendment is also pretty simple to me. As you heard, my oldest son's a police officer. He wanted to be that since he was a child. And he, like I believe, that the only thing that stops a bad guy was a good guy with a gun. And I know the Second Amendment. I carry the United States Constitution with me. It's in my briefcase in the car. It doesn't say we have the right to bear arms for hunting. Check. It doesn't have that caveat in there. It drives me wild. I had to turn off a while back the Democratic debate when they were talking about, well, yeah, you should be able to hunt. I'm sitting there screaming, going, it doesn't say that. Of course, Sherry looks at me and says, sit down, it's okay. That and don't wake Declan up by screaming. The 10th Amendment is the other one I mentioned to you. I think it's important. The duties and powers not given to the federal government are reserved to the states. And how many times have we seen that? Now I have abridged it, and if you want to read the exact wording, I have to get it out for you. I apologize. I don't know it verbatim. How many times have we seen that destroyed? We talked a little bit about Common Core earlier. We can talk about anything you guys want to talk about. But the reality is we need to go back to recognizing that that was done by the founders for a reason, which is to protect us from an overwhelming centralized government. And right now they're spending more money than we have. They're spending our credit card to do things to us with our money that we don't want them doing. It's a pretty long list. Any given day, depending where I go, either out in the ag area where the EPA is the nominee for the most evil agency on the earth, to other areas where, in fact, the Department of Education is the most evil agency on earth. And now we're in April, and the IRS is clearly the nominee currently for the most evil agency in the federal government. We've got some real winners there. One final point I'll make, and then I'll turn to questions. I've been asked about my position on right to life by numerous places, more often than not, and it's a justifiable question. I'm absolutely pro-life, have been my entire life. There's one other part of that I think is important. It's not just saying it, it's leading on issues. Sherry and I adopted our youngest son not because we wanted to have some idea of doing something heroic. We couldn't have a child biologically. But what it did for us is open up our eyes to the terrible challenge children in the foster care system, the adoption system, both in the United States and overseas face. We adopted our youngest son from Russia. And through that process, we learned about the challenges. We've taken that on as something we do through charitable work and other things, because not only is it right to life, it's right to a life. We brought Declan home, and the first 9 months we picked him up to hold him. He'd be stiff as a board because he'd never been held. My youngest brother's adopted 5 children through foster care in Genesee and Oakland County. And I can tell you stories about some of the challenges those children faced. And as Gary noted, if we don't care for these children in education, or we don't care for these children when they're in foster care and get them to a loving home as quickly as we can, we pay societally for them. And the other thing morally that's wrong is we waste, or run the risk of wasting, a human life. They aren't achieving their potential. They can't achieve their potential if we don't care for them, if we don't make sure they have a loving home, and that's the first priority. It needs to be the priority of our system, and I'm here to tell you right now it's not. So that's some of the things, and we could talk, and I could go from one thing to the other all night, and sometimes I do that with people, but more importantly, for me, I'd like to answer questions that you may have about any of the things we talked about, issues you see are important, and I'll just turn it over to you. Thank you for your time, everybody.
Thank you. Give him a hand. We're going to now open it up for questions and answers, as we always do at the Tea Party meeting. You got questions to ask Mr. Mitchell, please ask him. He's willing and able to answer them for you. So anybody's got a question, raise your hand, please, and I'll call on you and bring the mic to you. Oh, I know better than that. Some of you got to have questions.
I didn't threaten anybody.
Thank you very much. Hold on.
Jim's up first. Okay.
I was curious to know who your competition is right now.
There are 3 others that have filed. There's a state senator from St. Clair, Phil Pavlos filed. There's a former state senator from Northern Macomb, Alan Sanborn. And there's a state representative from the very southern Harrison Township, Tony Forlini, has filed. We're getting pretty close to filing deadline, so I think that's pretty much it on the Republican side. There's a discussion about a former state rep who's talked about filing from the Democratic side, but let's be honest, in this district, he needs a whole lot of prayer to have any chance of even showing up on the register, so we'll see how that turns out. I think we'll end up with 3 others on the Republican side. I think one of which spoke here last month, didn't he? Okay. I can't keep track of his schedule, but that's who's announced they're running and have filed petitions with the Bureau of Canvassers. Go ahead, sir.
I have a comment and a question
Sure.
for you, Mr. Mitchell. Thank you
First it's Paul, man. It's Mr. Mitchell.
Okay.
That's a scary. Say that for my dad who's still alive.
Paul, it is. Thank you for being here too tonight. By the way, we appreciate, always appreciate hearing from you. I'll get my comment over with quickly, and then
Sure.
then I have just one question to ask. I picked up very quickly on your mention of our democracy in this country. I have to say, sir, that we are not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic.
Understood
There's
that.
a vast difference.
I understand that.
And the word democracy is being bantered about rather loosely by some people, not necessarily you. I'm quite offended by that because it is contrary to what a constitutional republic should be.
I understand the distinction.
Do you have any comment on that?
No, just I understand the distinction, and I study the distinction sometimes in talking with people. It's easier not to get into the nuances because some people go, you understand it? I would suggest you're among the 2% of the world that do understand the distinction. Maybe I have a responsibility for being more forceful about that, but I clearly understand the distinction.
It wouldn't offend me if you were more forceful about it.
I understand. I appreciate that.
Thank you. My question, Paul, if you're elected to to a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, what are the few top things that you would do or be involved in reducing the size and the reach and the power of the federal government, which is way beyond its original constitutional limits now? Thank you.
Let's start with picking on, because we talked about it earlier, the Department of Education. He's beat you to the punch on that. Let's pick on the Department of Education first, as they're the current nominee. Common Core is just an example, a sample of the problem of the Department of Education. There are 43 separate K-12 education programs currently funded at the federal level. They fund bureaucrats in Washington, they fund bureaucrats in Chicago, they fund bureaucrats in Lansing to tell us here locally how to educate our children, because we're clearly too ignorant to know how to do that. It gives us little things like Common Core and a whole series of other wonderful ideas that the federal government has. We spend more money than any other country in the world on K-12 education. And our children graduate between 23rd and 25th in the world from K-12 in terms of skills. And the answer you hear from many, especially progressives, is we just need to spend more money. I ran a business. I full well tell you that you don't solve a problem by just throwing a checkbook at it. And by the way, that's our checkbook. There are a number of programs the federal government currently undertakes that are not part of the federal mission. We could go through those in detail, but I said there's 43 of these gems. The core programs that the federal government theoretically should be involved in, we could discuss the Department of Ed at length whether they should be around or not. But we need to go back to when I grew up, something called block grants. The reality is, if we're going to be involved, if the federal government's going to be involved in any way, shape, or form, it gets block granted and lump sum to states and municipalities with a set of guidelines and let them run it. Because right now what's happening is between 22 and 25% of what we put into K-12 education at the federal level gets spent on bureaucrats, not educating our children. My mission in terms of doing that will be to get education back in a situation where, in fact, we're not throwing money at bureaucrats and failing to educate our children. Second part of that in terms of higher ed is I've spoken with the chair of the incoming chair in all likelihood of the House Workforce Education Committee about what they do in terms of reauthorizing higher education. Because right now higher education, as you know, student loans are ballooning. It's being run by the federal government, costing us huge. It's going to cost the taxpayers. They're talking about forgiving student loans. Okay, sure. It makes no sense. Is get that reauthorized so in fact we empower families and students to make decisions on their education and don't twist that through federal incentives and loans. Those are two priorities at the top of my head that will address it. We deal with the EPA. Let's take waters of the U.S. At this point in time, given their regulations, a fair-sized mud puddle they can claim is actually covered in the waters of the U.S. It's driving people in the ag community wild. It's driving a number of businesses trying to open up new businesses as they deal with now these emerging regulations in water of the U.S. Step number one is just take the money away. They don't have the money. They can't write the regs. They can't enforce the regs. And the good news is they're not using our credit card to pay themselves to do it. Take the money away. The federal government is currently doing things we don't want them doing with our check, with our credit card. Take the money away. Clean Power Standards will close 9 power plants in Michigan. 9 of them. By the way, 18 months doesn't give us enough time to solve the problem, even if the state lasts 18 months. They need to build power plants. They need to make decisions whether there's a power plant or what they do with power now to comply in 18 months. So we need to just take away one of the things that Congress can do quickly because they cannot pass laws fast enough to beat the regulators to the punch, is take the money. That, of course, means they have to pass budgets, but hey, one step at a time, take away the money. So they can't do that. Example, my approach on it. I come from private business. Money talks and everything else walks. I clean that up. Okay? Good. Thank you. Yes, sir.
What would be your position on repealing Obamacare?
Got to repeal and replace Obamacare. It's a two-step process. You've got to repeal it, but you have to replace it. Sometimes people talk about simply repealing it. The reality is that we can't wave a magic wand and go back to days of yore. They killed the old system. The old system had some flaws in it, but they killed it. And that means at this point in time, we've got to replace it with a system that allows us, for example, to buy insurance coverage across state lines, to buy a coverage that will, in fact, allow us to tailor insurance that we need for our families and not basically buy the same policy for everybody. I'll give you an example on that. I got the charming letter this fall from Blue Cross Blue Shield, very glossy paper, very nice. It says, "Congratulations, your health care plan's been continued." I thought, well, that's nice, that's good news. I have an individual plan since I retired out of the company. And your new premium is $1,923 a month. I'm not making that up. It's my wife, myself, my 2 stepdaughters, and Declan. There's 5 of us, that's all. They didn't put in there what the premium was the previous year. I had to go back and look it up. It's $1,700 a month. And your co-pays, it goes through this all, are the following. Well, I had to look that up. They didn't tell you it changed. My wife's asthma medication went up to $700 a month. Now, we can afford that, but there's a lot of people that can't. And that's their answer of a plan. Meanwhile, by the way, we're paying for things. This may be information you don't want to know. We're paying for coverage for like obstetrics. Well, if we needed obstetrics, we wouldn't have gone through adopting in Russia and 6 weeks in Vladivostok in the winter, okay? But I'm paying for it. You're paying for it whether you want to or not. So are you. Everyone happy about that? I'll give you a list of things you're paying for that you aren't going to use in this lifetime, and if you do, they're going to do a new movie about it. You're going to be a headline. Bill has a child. There'll be a new. The reality is, you can't tailor your care. You can't tailor what you believe you need for your family, which in many cases is in what we're buying under Obamacare. Those are 2 key changes that need to be made. There's others. And one of the things I readily admit is that don't pretend you're an expert about everything. Too many people do. That's how we got proposal 1. I've already got a group of 2 CEOs of healthcare outfits, a durable medical equipment provider. A group of them have agreed to work with me over the summer to come up with a much more detailed set of items to replace Obamacare. Because I don't do it every day. They do. And the one thing about this job is you've got to be able to recognize when, in fact, there are people that are smarter than you about it and sit down and talk with them about it. Otherwise, you're just guessing and trying to profile and doing op-eds or press releases and looking special, but you're not getting anything done. I'm 59. I don't expect to be 80 doing this, so I've only got a limited period of time in which to be able to do this, make a difference, and that's why I'm doing it. I don't need the job. I do need to make a difference because we can't continue the way we are. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, you're laying a weight on me, man.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
First off, again, like everybody else, thank you for coming out tonight.
It's good to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I'm sure, I've got kids. My kids are, one's graduating here in just a few weeks. My daughter's in her 2nd year. And I have to tell you, I'm petrified for what my kids, your kids, all these other kids are walking into. And I'm just curious of your feelings. We've got a federal government, an IRS, that targets people based on their political beliefs. We have EPA. We have senators now that want to cause the climate change deniers. They want to go after them. We're in a world that it seems our federal government is becoming more and more unleashed and turned on the people. Now, every other country that I know throughout history that's done that, the outcome hasn't been good. And I'm just curious, especially with the IRS, Veterans Affairs. Oh my gosh, the things that our vets are having to deal with. I'm just curious your thoughts on some of these things.
Let's talk about the IRS in two manners. One is the IRS itself, and the other is our tax code, because that's a good place to start in terms of the risks we've got. Many of you remember back when Senator Peters ran for office. I was concerned because the Republicans still hadn't figured out who's going to run for sure against him, and he's going around the state talking about what a wonderful guy he is. So I decided to run some ads opposing Senator Peters, now Senator Peters, in which we described him as pure Washington. If you look up Gary Peters, pure Washington, you'll see the ads. We ran a series of ads, maybe incredibly popular with Lon Johnson and Senator Peters, but at least tried to buy some time for Republicans to figure out who was going to run. It won't surprise you to know, or maybe it will, that it was about 6-8 weeks after those ads launched that, surprise, surprise, I get an audit. I know that shocks you. It's strictly a coincidence, I'm sure. There was nothing intended by it. So, yeah, I think it is. They do target people for political reasons. My guess is that a couple of our current Democratic representatives may have mentioned something to people about me being a thorn in someone's side. Frankly, let's be honest about it. Our own state, sometimes our own side attacks our own people. Look what's going on in the presidential primary. On the tax code itself, we've got 74,000 pages of the tax code. Last count, I haven't counted them all. That was when someone said, does anybody in this room believe that you are fully compliant with every page of that tax code? If you do, I'm really happy for you. I doubt it. We have a former vice president. He and his wife signed their tax return and sent a letter. We think it's right. Our accounting firm thinks it's right. If it's not, please call us if you have a problem with it, because they don't know for sure it's right, and they pay a lot of money to a major CPA firm. We need to abolish the current tax code. We need to abolish it and go to a tax system that is a simple tax system. Now we can talk about all the differences, all the, because there's a variety of versions of it. I'll settle for 3 or 4 tax brackets, reduce the number of tax deductions to 1 for a home up to a certain amount, the child tax credit, charitable tax credit, and everyone else just pay their taxes. Now, people talk about fair tax. There's a variety of versions. If we can get to that, we have right now more IRS agents than we have Homeland Security or FBI agents in this country. Now, think about the difference between Greece and Ireland. Greece had financial problems. They're heavily in debt. Their answer to it is they kept increasing their taxes. Well, the Greeks, not being entirely stupid people, figured, well, they can't put us all in jail. So many of them stopped paying their taxes, or at least all of them, or did their own version of them. Because again, what did you do? Jail us all? And now Greece is in a situation, a generational situation, that they're going to have a terrible economic problem overcoming their debt and their tax issues. Meanwhile, in Ireland, they reduced their taxes significantly. They reduced the size of their federal government. And now we're trying to write regulations at a federal level to prevent companies from inverting and going to Ireland. Well, it seems to be a whole lot easier to fix our tax code than try to write regulations to prevent companies from merging with other companies and moving offshore because it's economically beneficial. But we'll try to regulate them. 2 most portable things in the world are capital, intellectual property. With a push of a button, you can move both. And we're trying to regulate it. It's another gem from our Treasury Department under the current administration. Fix our tax code, we would not have the issues we have where other countries are far more beneficial, and they are. Okay, did that answer your question? We could talk about the VA, but we'd be here a long time about that. A simple answer on the VA. A veteran should have a health card just like we have, just like I have. They should be able to use that health card in any manner they see fit to provide coverage for themselves. Walter Reed provides incredible services, some of those for many people that are seriously injured. But there's a whole lot of veterans out and across the country that are not getting adequate health care. Veterans are dying. They've earned that benefit. They've more than earned that right. We need to give them a system that meets their needs instead of forcing them to travel, however, incredible periods of time to get services and to be told that their person isn't there and all the other things that we've seen happen. And let's be honest about it, how many of those people have lost their jobs? In our world, in the private sector, it'd be dead men walking a green mile. The unemployment rate would go up statistically and meaningfully in a New York minute, but not in government. Yes?
My question is about Article 5, Convention of the States, Mark Levin's.
She's got notes.
Oh, these are notes of
Oh, that's
from
okay.
you.
I thought she had notes on a question. I go, whoa.
No, it's a different Article 5 than's been tried before. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's a federal against the executive branch. It's not just amendments. It's more specific. Are you familiar with it?
I've heard a little bit about, obviously, as you mentioned, there's been several versions of constitutional conventions proposed, some to limit it just to taxes, some to limit it. So, I mean, if you give me more detail, I'll try and answer what you got.
I don't have it because I kind of changed this question. I just wondered how you feel about it, what you do know.
A constitutional convention?
Yeah.
The only way, in my opinion, it's wise to open up she's got a backup. Don't grab that microphone from her. Just break her arm off. The only way it's wise, in my opinion, to have a constitutional convention is, in fact, you limit it to a specific set of subjects and a specific proposal. Otherwise, I think if you think the Republican primary is fun, if you think the convention in Cleveland is going to be fun, a constitutional convention, it will be a 3-ring circus beyond all recognition. And the reality is you'll have the convention, you still have to get ratification of the states, and you'll be chasing it around for longer than you and I are going to be alive. So unless you deal with a specific issue, unless you deal with a specific set of wording, and everyone agrees that's what they're there for, and only that reason, does it make any sense? Otherwise, all you've done is you've now created pandemonium. And as I said, the Republican primary will show you what that looks like. And that's only a microcosm, in my opinion.
Okay.
Okay?
Next one is your position on FATA. The Freedom, it's a Defense Act. Boy, I wish I would have brought my notes.
Anybody know what FATA is?
It's in right now.
One of the problems in government, they have more acronyms than I can even remember. I'm
Sorry.
sorry, I don't know, I
Okay.
don't recognize it, or I'd be happy to climb into it, but the one thing, and let me suggest as you're looking for the next question, as you talk to people, you've all had pretty straightforward questions. Insist that you get a direct answer. I don't think everyone will always agree. You won't always agree with me. But what you have to insist, a comment I made to people as I talked to them is, when was the last time you talked to far too many elected officials? I don't mean to have Gary back to saying, not me, but how many times you talk to a long-term politician, let's put it that way, a career politician, they talk to you for 10 minutes and still not sure what they said when you're done talking to you. I mean, I've had that happen in my career. Don't accept that as allowable. It's simply not. The other thing I suggest to you is you need to, Proposal 1 frustrated me because people kept telling you, the legislature kept telling you, well, there is no other answer. Now, I spent over 30 years in private business. You bet there's other answers. There better be, or why are you here? But instead of do that, they want to say, well, some of them, I voted no. And that was their best answer for it. They vote no, and then they don't do anything about it after that. Some voted yes. Some of my opponents in this race did both. But here's the thing. You need someone that will actually participate in solving the problem. When I was asked during the Proposal 1, what would you put forth a proposal, I had an answer for that. I wasn't even in office. It wasn't that hard to come up with an answer for that. You need people that represent you. You're paying quality money to do that, to actually propose solutions and get things done. Or put it in other terms, and sometimes this offends the career politicians, but hey, what the heck. If you're looking for someone that just votes no, and they're trying to get a certain score on a scorecard so they feel like they're a hero, I suggest you just get a hunting dog. I have one. I can teach it to push the red button. It'll also retrieve birds. It works for kibble and is more loyal than a legislator. Get a dog. You should expect more from any level of representation. They need to participate in the solution and not just tell you that they voted no or they oppose something. What are you doing about the problem? To Gary's credit, week 2, he's got a 10-package bill on Freedom of Information Act. He's already told you where he stands on the Detroit Public Schools. And I'm here to tell you that that's a statute mile better than a whole lot of people who have been in Lansing for a long time. Insist on it. From me and from anybody else you've got around. And you had a question.
Running huge deficits at the federal level, year after year after year. And of course, one side of that is to do things so that the economy can grow, so that a larger economy results in more tax revenue. But there's a spending side of that too. What are some areas you would say we can definitely cut here? Entitlements. What about the military? All of those big chunks of the budget.
Well, first, and while I know you said growth, don't discount the power of that. And just briefly, in the last decade, the government's been growing somewhere around 1.5% per year. The prior 30 or 40 years, I had to look it up, and I apologize, I don't remember which is off the top of my head, but the average has been closer to 3 to 3.5%. That difference is huge in terms of the impact it has on federal revenue. It's massive. And it gets discounted as we talk about how we deal with our deficit, but it's important to recognize that. If we simplified our tax code and went to 4 tax brackets we could talk about, the reality is you could reduce tax rates by as much as 40% and still at the same amount you're collecting revenue, even at the current economic level. At 3%, assuming you can get to 3%, assuming you get to 2.5%, you're almost twice as much revenue. Now, in terms of cuts, which I believe we need to do, so don't get me wrong, absolutely have to do that. But we have to work on both sides of that equation. In terms of cuts, I've already given examples. In terms of the EPA, we could fight for, God, I don't know how many years about repealing or eliminating the EPA, start by hacking away their budget, and then reauthorize the EPA. I participated in Earth Day back in middle school, the first Earth Day. I'm actually that old. And the EPA is significantly different now than it was back then, in days of yore. We need to reauthorize the EPA and scale back our operation. The first step to get to what we spend is take the money away. I already talked about education. We can do significantly what we spend on K-12 education at the federal level and not even impact how much money is spent at the local level. We can reduce the amount of money we spend to collect taxes if we get a tax system that, in fact, people recognize as fair and they can do with a sheet of paper or a couple of sheets of paper, and they don't need an accounting firm to do it. There aren't many businesses I know of that actually don't use an accounting firm to do their taxes, or many individuals, because they're that complex. We can go through a list of that. But entitlements is the one thing. Let's talk about it. And you just used that term. And if we achieve nothing tonight, I want to get you to stop using the term entitlement. Everybody in this room to stop using entitlement. What are the only things you're entitled to? We're having a quiz. What are the only things you're entitled to? Well, those are good things, although I'm not sure, according to some people, you're entitled to those, but we can talk about that. Well, if you say life and liberty, you're entitled to collect on your Social Security, you paid into it. You're entitled to collect on your Medicare. Now, are those at risk? You bet your butt they are, given the way they're spending money, but you paid into them. You paid under pretense they'll be there for you. Problem is, we have a system right now that says we have entitlements. The progressives have a tendency to use a term that you're entitled to it. When did it happen that we are entitled to be supported for the rest of our natural-born days or sit on the couch? Don't forget, I ran some of the largest welfare work programs in the country, back when welfare work had a time limit, back where you had to participate so many hours a week or you didn't get your benefits. In some cases, like in Cleveland, we were the last stop before your benefits were cut. Now, yes, I was called names. 2 occasions, so the business end of a gun. Okay, those are fun times. The reality is we need to first stop calling entitlements. They're income support programs intended to help you go from where you're at now to support yourself and your family. Not to support you until you're 85 or 65 and you go to the other form of income support because whatever lame reason you have, you can't work. I was asked when we ran welfare to work programs, well, what about people that have limitations? What about people that have alcohol problems? My dad worked in a factory every day, sometimes worked 2 jobs. And I'm here to tell you my dad had a drinking problem. He went to work every day. I believe most people can work, most people will work, given the opportunity to do so, and not given the incentive that it's easier to stay home. So first, we stop by calling them entitlements. Then we get those programs under control. Some states have started to do that. There are about 9 of them now that have made significant changes. Kansas being one done it recently. Maine did it. They cut their, what was food stamp, now called SNAP program. Changed the name to protect the guilty. Continue doing the same thing. They reduced they're requiring that they work at least, I think it's 20 hours a week, maybe 15 hours a week. They reduced their caseload for SNAP to 12,000 cases in a few months. I don't believe people should go hungry. I don't believe people should be on the street. But I do believe most adults can work, and they should work. We need to help them to work. That's what a big part of my career was. And I'll insist on that going forward, because we're not helping families, we're not helping individuals if we enable them to depend upon the government to support them, and then their kids, and their grandkids, and that's the way it works if we don't do something about it. Answer your question? I have a supporter, someone who's endorsed the campaign, who's a retired Major General from the Marine Corps, Mark Lott, over in St. Clair. His last assignment was in procurement for the Marine Corps. He contends, this is another example where it's not exactly my first hand knowledge, he contends that you can reduce the cost to the military, based on his knowledge, by 20 to 25% and actually give the guys in the field what they need. Our procurement system is all screwed up. We're procuring things they don't want. We're procuring things that don't work. And we're paying high prices for them. I'll give you one example. They just did a bidding on the replacement for the Bradley fighting vehicles. The 2 they've gone to demos on, there were 3 submitted. The 2 that they've gone to demos to build 10 each, are foreign conglomerates, forming consortiums. One is from Singapore. The Bradley fighting vehicle, based on what they've done in procurement, isn't going to be built here. I'll let y'all observe, kind of absorb that a little bit. How do we defend ourselves if we don't build our own bullets or make our own bullets? This is insane. The one from Singapore is so small that when the Marines sit in the back, they have to interlock their knees because it's so small. I asked him, I said, no, don't, I mean, I've not served. I said, don't you want to get out of that as fast as you can? He said, that'd be a good idea. But that's one of the two they chose. Now, it wasn't chosen based on input from the field. We need to fix that. The good news is I've got the General Lott and others. He's put me in touch with a couple other people that will participate in that. Some actually will go back and go back, maybe as civilians, back to the military in a new administration if we get one that actually wants to support the military. We don't need to spend what we're spending right now. They want to eliminate the A-10. You ask the guys in the field, it's the best ground support aircraft in the world. We're spending money on the F-35 that they still don't have an ejection seat that they're confident in, how much it is costing us per unit that no one's sure exactly what it's going to do what we want to do. I think the F-22 is pretty good. Why don't we just stay with that? Keep the A-10s and save ourselves a lot of money. Sure.
Okay. Say you are successful and you get voted into office.
Okay.
Do you get to handpick your staff, or do you have to rely on the Republican Party?
No, I get to handpick my staff.
Okay, because I have no faith in the Republican Party right now.
I
voted for him for almost 35 years, you know.
No, I've never, trying to think. I've never had a job that I've had to let someone else pick my staff. I'll be responsible for them. I'll be responsible for performance and getting outcomes we want from them. But I need to be able to pick the people that will, in fact, respond to what I believe are the priorities. For example, I ran a fair-sized company that we had 19 campuses. We trained 6,000 people, 6,000 adults a year when I retired. Our policy was all calls got returned in 24 hours. I don't care if they're going to be good calls or bad calls, because no one gets any happier by putting them off. Sort of like when you call charter, and by the time you talk to a live person, you just want to beat someone into submission. You can't, I mean, ignoring people is not the way to have the good better. It's just one example. When I retired, I visited every campus once a quarter. We had 19 of them. So I spent 19 full work days in a quarter in the field, because that's where our students were, that's where our employers were, that's where the rubber hit the road. I've done 480 visits because that's where it matters out here in the district, not sitting in an office making phone calls to raise money. No one's going to pick my staff for me, and also no one's going to tell me how to vote. I'll talk with you guys about it. And the other commitment is that if we work on the scheduling, because often by Tuesday night, you have to be back in Washington. If we work on the scheduling, I'll come back a couple of times a year and I'll directly report what's going on. You can all tell me about the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'll tell you about why the good, the bad, and the ugly is going on, because I think that's important dialogue to have. And the only way to do that is do that directly rather than do it through intermediaries. You don't have to depend on a postcard to tell me that you're concerned about something.
On that line, this is just a quick take. Would you be open, and information we ask from all of us, but would you be willing, we have great things like technology, Skype in on a meeting maybe,
Sure.
something like that?
Sure. Yeah, Skype's fine. I mean, and we use that technology in my company. Sometimes it's, wherever I can and whatever I will do, whatever I can to actually, because I think it's better to be able to come before the group, look at the group, talk to the group. People can throw things if they wish, you know, tell you've lost your mind.
Service might not be happy about that.
You don't go to Secret Service as a member of Congress. You know, Obama and company gets that, and Hillary, but not us lowly members. We have to go solo and take our chances on that. So my problem, I was telling someone earlier, I was a hockey goalie, so I'm not smart enough to duck. So I mean, I stop stuff. It's just kind of inherent now. But no, I'll come back whenever I can. I'll do Skype, but it's more important to come before the group and talk and get feedback on concerns. So a couple times a year we can do that. Just work on scheduling. Happy to do that. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.